When we think about the birth of Jesus, what we're celebrating here at Christmas time, how would it look for us to approach it from a background that you're familiar with? How could you help me equip parents to do just that?
So Kevin, you got kids, right?
I do, yeah.
Can I ask you how old they are?
16, 14, 12, 12, and 10.
Oh, God bless you. I'm going to be praying for you, brother. Okay, so my kids are 33, 31, 25, and 24. So they're a little bit older. But so let me just ask you, like your kids might ask you. So, Dad, why are you even celebrating this? You know it's a farce. You know that Jesus never even lived. I mean, look, I can demonstrate this to you. If I describe somebody who was born of a virgin, who had 12 disciples, who died to save the world, who rose again on the third day after he died, whose followers celebrated his death and resurrection with the Lord's Supper, you know who I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about Mithras, the Persian god that preceded Jesus by 400 years. If you bury and dig down underneath every Roman basilica in the city of Rome, you will find at its foundation a Mithraic temple. That's the story that was stolen by Christians to create the fiction called Jesus. I mean, I can't believe it anymore. I don't know why you believe it. I mean, I think you shouldn't believe it any more than Santa Claus. Now listen, I know I've seen movies on this. There's scholarship all over the internet. I mean, why don't you even know this? Okay, now, as a parent hearing that,
yeah,
probably from your 12-year-old, not from your 14-year-old. Because the age right now, and one of the books you didn't mention that I wrote with Sean McDowell is a book called So the Next Generation Will Know. And that's just a book that talks about how to raise up and train up Gen Z, which is the high schoolers right now.
Yep.
And this is a different generation. It's got a different aspect of technology and access to technology that we didn't have. I didn't have growing up, that my kids didn't even have, who are now in their 30s. So the question becomes, that age of skepticism used to be, maybe, it might have been in 17, 18 when you first went to college. But now, there's good reason to believe that age of skepticism is right around 12, 13. And people who are no longer Christians at the age of 19, when asked, when did you decide it wasn't true, typically say between the ages of 10 and 17. They're not deciding it's not true when they leave your home. They're deciding it's not true while they're still with you. They just haven't told you. And when they get to college, they're happy to be away from the one person that forces them to go to church. And they stop going to church.
Yeah.
But they didn't decide then it wasn't true. They decided while they were still with us. And the statistics bear this out. I've got one page on our website at coldcasechristianity.com. If you go to that website and just type in the word updated, the only article that has the word updated in it is an update. I just updated about a month ago of all of the surveys going back 20 years on the departure of young people from the church. So I've got a collection of them there with links out to all those. I study this because it's interesting to me. I was a youth pastor for years, and when my kids were high schoolers, I worried about this kind of stuff. I would take them on immersive trips to help them see that Christianity is true, evidentially. And that story about Mithras I just gave you, that story is available online, exactly the way I just told it to you. None of that is true. But we have to know how to debunk the false claims that surround our kids and really help them to see the truth before somebody else tells them this story. My kids learned about Mithras from me, not from their peers, not from their college mates, not from anybody they learned about online. I wanted to expose them. I call this, it's inoculation theory. The idea here, and I know this is in a world of vaccines and in our political views about vaccinations, I get all that, but the idea here is that we are going to expose our kids to the truth or to the claims that oppose Christianity before they're exposed by somebody else. So when they get them in their most robust form, they're like, I've already been there and done that. I've already heard that. I already know that's not true. And so this is part of what we do as parents. Look, here's what it comes down to. There are many of us as parents who have done a better job preparing our kids to be... What city do you live in, Kevin?
I'm in East Texas, out in Tyler, Texas.
Oh, so you're very close to where my dad. We grew up in Hughes Springs, Texas. Do you know where that is? By Dangerfield.
I know where Dangerfield is. I don't know
We're
Hughes
slightly
Springs.
further north than you guys, but we're northeast Texas, just like you and Tyler.
Okay.
So there are people who are better prepared right now and have prepared their kids to be better Dallas Cowboy fans.
That's right. Yeah.
Or if you're in that part of the world, you always end up watching the New Orleans Saints, right? It's either the Saints or the Cowboys. You're stuck with one of those two.
I grew up in Baton Rouge, and so Saints fan.
Okay, so there you go. So you can tell me why Taysom Hill is not going to be the quarterback of the future for the Saints, or is going to be the quarterback of the Saints, right? Like you can make this case better. Then you can make a case for why Jesus is who he said he is. And your kids will grow up being better New Orleans Saints fans then they will be Christ followers. Now,
Okay,
I want you to think about that for a second. Let me give you an example of this.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, the last time you were all together, did you spend more time talking about the sports teams or about the culture, the shows on Netflix, than you did about Jesus? Probably you did. I'm going to be honest. Probably you did. And we spend time talking about the things that really don't matter.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it comes down to how geeked out are we? I was just talking to somebody else about this. I used to do chapels for the Green Bay Packers. And Packers fans are a rare breed. They travel. They will go to all the games. Almost every game you go to, if Packers are playing, they have home field advantage because they travel to every single stadium in America.
Yeah, that's right.
And so there are people who are far more committed to their Packer fandom than they are to their Christendom. And so we're going to have to make a decision, especially at times like this. Now, what's really interesting is that in those periods in history, and I wrote a book just now called Person of Interest, where I'm just looking at the history that precedes Jesus and then follows Jesus to demonstrate that history alone makes a case for Jesus, even if you didn't have a New Testament. You can make a case to your kids just from the fuse and fallout of history that either precede the bomb we call Jesus or follow him. Now, it turns out that case is important for us to learn how to make. And most of us don't know how to make that case. But we ought to know if we're going to, and it turns out historically that when Christians are being heavily persecuted and are winnowed out down to the core believers who find themselves in community trying to survive, Christianity begins to thrive. So I think what we have to do right now with our families is to kind of block out the world and the distractions of the world and get back down to that core community of our family to talk about the things that really matter. And you'll see again that Christianity will thrive even in your own family.
Okay, so let me ask you this. And you mentioned fuse and fallout. I get the concept now, even as you mentioned it. There's a fuse, there's a bomb, and there's fallout from it. Is that something regularly you do then as a detective? Is that kind of common phraseology?
Yeah, so what I do this is if you have a no-body murder, that's where a husband kills his wife and then says, oh, yeah, she ran away. I don't know where she went. And he's buried her someplace and nobody can find the body. And then 30 years go by, the body never recovered. How do we even demonstrate that she's dead, let alone that he's killed her? What we tell the jurors is that I can tell you from the fuse that precedes that nasty day in which she disappeared, if that was a murder, that was an explosive day. That bomb went off. It had a fuse that burned toward the detonation. After the bomb exploded, you had debris everywhere. We're going to make the case and demonstrate what happened. There's no body. There's no evidence. They didn't even take pictures. They assumed it was a missing persons report. They didn't even take pictures as though it was a murder. And now 30 years have gone by. They sold the house. The crime scene has been destroyed. What do? Well, we examine the fuse and the fallout to determine if we have a felony. That's how we work these cases. So the same thing is true for Jesus. If you had no New Testament, if your kids said, yeah, but you believe in the Bible, I don't. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's imagine a scenario in which there's no Bibles. No New Testament. I can make the case for who Jesus is just from the fuse and fallout of history, but you have to know your history to do it. And I think what's happened to us in the West anyway is we are standing on the shoulders of Jesus and his followers and don't even know we are. So as an atheist, the stuff that I loved the most was literature, art. Now I have a weird background. So my background, I became a Christian at 35, but my background before I became a Christian was I was an artist. I have a bachelor's degree in design, a master's degree in architecture, and then I became a detective. And so the things that mattered to me as an atheist were always literature, art, music, education, science. And most atheists will put those somewhere in their top 10. But it turns out all 5 of those are so utterly dependent on Jesus and the worldview he inaugurated that we are standing on his shoulders and don't even know it. And from those 5 aspects of culture and the fallout of history, you can completely reconstruct the story of Jesus and return to all of the facts related to Jesus because, believe it or not, Jesus is hidden in the nooks and crannies of those 5 areas of culture. There's a 6th area also. Non-Christian world religions also describe Jesus robustly.
Oh, my word.
So it turns out you're not going to be able to avoid Jesus. But here's the problem as parents. Honestly, if our kids are on a volleyball team and they need some coaching, we will go to the ends of the earth to make sure they get tutors, they get coaches to help them in their volleyball team. If they're having a problem in the SAT, we will pay to have them a tutor to take the SAT. We will do all of this on things that don't matter nearly as much as Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, are we ready to really take the ownership
Yeah, that's right.
Let's face it, I was a youth pastor for years. When my kids were in high school, I was their youth pastor. By the way, I stopped being a youth pastor when all my kids were finally out of high school. In other words, I saw my role as a youth pastor as an extension of my role as a father.
Yeah.
I do not reassign the training of my children in spiritual matters to somebody else. That's my job.
Yeah.
So I took it over as the youth pastor because I wanted to be. But if they had no youth pastor, if we didn't live near a church, I would have done the same thing with my kids. Now, look, let me just say one thing before we go any further.
Yeah.
You can do all of this with the best intentions. Prepare yourself so you're really good at it, and you're still going to have kids that will fall in that spectrum of belief and commitment to belief. So a lot of this is going to come down to whether not so much whether they know it's true, but whether they're willing to bend their knee to it.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up if you feel like, hey, I've tried, but my kids don't. I get it. There's free agency. God has allowed us to design and given us a world in which people can act freely. And he does that because he knows that that loving anyone, if you want to have love in the world, you're going to have to build that on the shoulders of free agency.